Hey there, welcome back to Creepy Encounters. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the videos. Divers of Reddit, what is your most horrifying experience underwater? I was on a wreck dive off Oahu down about 90 feet with an ex-girlfriend and the owner of a local dive shop. The ex and I are experienced divers and we were all just messing around, checking out the wreck and the turtles nearby. There had been a group that was on the wreck but they had left as we descended, so it was just us three. About halfway into the dive another person shows up, alone. He got the attention of the dive shop owner, and after furious scribbling on slates, the shop owner came over to us and wrote out, "You both stay down and finish your dive, I'm taking him up," and then turned to the other dude and gave the guy his octopus regulator to breathe from. We didn't really know what was going on, so we had a perfectly lovely dive, got some good pictures, and ascended like normal. When we got back on the boat we heard the story. That other guy was from a different boat and had been diving a totally different dive site. He somehow got separated and lost, and had somehow drifted about a mile away from where he went in. There was nothing else around in the direction he was going except Tahiti a few thousand miles away. Worst part is that the other guy's boat didn't even realize he was gone and left without him. If that guy hadn't floated past our wreck, I don't know what would have happened. The current pushes you away from land where we were, and since the boat didn't even know he was lost, he would have been floating out for a long time before someone realized they had a missing diver. One of my first dives was in shit show conditions. There was a strong current and so much sand/debris everywhere that visibility was at about 12 inches. For some reason the dive master was like, "It'll be fine once we get below 40 feet. We started descending on a guide wire, and after getting to about 55 feet my brother and I, who were dive partners, could not see anyone else in the group. We waited at the bottom of the wire for 10 minutes and after no one showed up we started to think that the rest of the group would be waiting on the surface. We came up and one guy from our group was at the buoy looking confused and the boat was gone. Turns out there were so many problems that the boat drove away so that the waves wouldn't throw it on top of us, but there were such large swells that the boat couldn't relocate us. We floated for about an hour before finally getting the boat's attention and being picked up. By far the worst motion sickness/dehydration I've ever experienced. Our first activity was underwater walking. We all got in a little speedboat and then took a short 5-minute trip out to another boat that had all of the equipment. The activity was similar to that time I did snuba in the Caribbean, and the oxygen tanks were up on the surface of the water. Instead of having a scuba mask to breathe out of, though, we had a very heavy helmet, it was about 80 pounds, I'd guesstimate, placed on our heads. They also gave us rubber shoes so that our feet wouldn't be mutilated by the coral. I went first, and the procedure was very simple. I just went on a ladder with most of my body in the water. They placed a rubber circle on my head, to cushion my shoulders and make a seal with the helmet, I presume, and then they put the helmet on. The second that it was on my body, I felt its weight forcing me to the bottom of the ocean. It was kind of scary, because I went down pretty fast, which caused the pressure to build up quickly. I made sure to swallow and yawn a bunch and I was fine. Also, I could never really get a deep breath of air because as I breathed in, the helmet began to make a vacuum, and I would have to stop to let it fill in with more air. Friend 1, and Friend 2, followed suit, and then a scuba diving man came down to be our guide. He handed all of us a piece of bread and a plastic bag which drew all the fish to us, and it was fun to see. There were metal guiding handrails on the ocean floor, which I followed. Friends 1 and 2 followed behind me. It was very difficult to walk, because the current was surprisingly strong and the helmets were quite heavy. We all enjoyed it though. As I breathed, there was a constant, loud sound as water whined in through the tube. It was kind of annoying, but it meant that I was getting air, which is very good. That's why it was so scary when the sound suddenly stopped. I was confused, but it quickly came back on after about 4 seconds and I could breathe again. It happened one more time, and again it came back on very quickly. I rationalized it by assuming that my tank had run empty and they were switching it to a different one, no big deal. I didn't understand how they would run out so quickly, but I didn't think too hard about it. It came back on and I could breathe, so no big deal. After about 10 minutes, I'm guessing, I have no idea how long we were down there, the guide points at me and indicates that he wants me to climb over the railing. I was very confused, but I did it after he made it very clear that that was what he wanted. It was kind of hard to see any peripherals out of the masks, so it was easy to get lost. I looked back behind me to make sure that, my friends, saw where I went and didn't get lost. We made eye contact, so I assumed we were all good and then turned back around to follow the guide. He had me walking in a very small path between two corals, so I went very slowly to make sure that I didn't cut my legs up on them. It was hard due to the strong underwater current, my unwieldy helmet, and an occasional tug by the air tube as I pulled it taut. As I reached the guide, my air stopped again. I figured it was no big deal, like the previous 2 times, and continued on. I followed him a bit, and it still didn't come on. 5 seconds. 10. I started to get confused. Was this some kind of joke? If so, it wasn't funny at all. 15 seconds. I thought to myself, don't panic. They always tell you not to panic. I panicked. I started taking quicker and quicker breaths, but I forced myself to stop that. I knew that was the worst thing I could do. I spun around to the guide and started pounding my fist on my chest. That was the sign for I can't breathe. He seemed to notice, I sure hoped he did, and started walking away. I could only hope that he was taking me to the boat. I thought maybe I should just try and shrug off the helmet and swim to the surface. I didn't know if I had enough air to make it, I didn't know if the boat was above me, I didn't want to hit my head, I didn't know if I could actually shrug it off, and I didn't want to get the bends, so I figured it wouldn't be a good idea. 30 seconds. I started to notice that I was getting less and less oxygen with each breath. Water was starting to fill in my helmet. I had to look up to breathe what little air I had. I grabbed hold of the guide's arm so that I wouldn't lose him and also so that he would understand the gravity of the situation. I gave him quite the death grip. 40 seconds. I saw the ladder of the boat. I knew that all I had to do was make it there and I would be okay. I must have gotten some sort of adrenaline rush with the renewed hope because I almost forgot about my lack of air. I fumbled for the ladder for a few seconds. It was hard to tell distances through the helmet because it had a bit of a magnifying aspect to it, before I grabbed it and started pulling myself up. As I broke the surface, air came rushing into my helmet and I took a nice deep breath. Breathing had never felt better. That was definitely the scariest experience of my life. 1/10, would not recommend. My first dive ever. My goggles strap snapped off the rental gear and they floated away. I wasn't scared really, but I was 50 feet underwater without vision. I just kept knocking my tank, which makes a specific noise in the water signaling my dive group. Eventually my goggles were handed to me and we carried on our way with the dive. I can see how it would be easy to freak out, but I just trusted my group and my training, and their response time didn't take more than 15 to 20 seconds. I had a dive buddy go out of air on me on a wreck in St. Lawrence. Thankfully this was a no-deco dive in less than 100 of water, and we weren't actually inside the wreck, but the part that made it particularly challenging was that the wreck was right in the middle of the shipping lane, where really large freighters travel. With really high current, so we couldn't just make an easy ascent to the surface. We had to navigate along a series of lines, pretty thick rope tied off on some good anchor points, that had been laid out to give divers something to hang on to so they could pull themselves against the current on the path to the wreck, and stabilize themselves during the swim back to the anchor line. We were making our exit and everything was going fine. He was on my long 7 hose out in front, and I had a hand on his knee, so we were keeping in good contact. Then for one moment I let go of his knee to deal with some gear, and in that split second he came off the line and got caught in the current, ripping my regulator out of his mouth in the process. I saw him manage to grab hold of another of the lines downstream, and he was hanging on for dear life, completely inverted, in a shipping lane, with no regulator in his mouth and no gas in his tank, flapping in the current like a flag in the wind. I bolted towards him as quickly as I could while still maintaining my own safety, and gathered up the 7 of abandoned hose and regulator along the way. I caught up to him and managed to get the regulator back into his mouth, but since he was inverted, it went in upside down and, as a result, didn't breathe like it should. He fixed that himself, but slipped off the line he was holding onto in the process. I managed to get a hold of him, but not without having to let go of the line myself, so I ended up hooking both of my feet around the line to keep us both in place. Somehow I managed to pull us both back down to where we could grab hold of the line. It was at this point that another diver in our group saw what was going on and assisted, and from there we were able to get back to the boat without any further incident. This was on the wreck of the Henry C. Darragh. It's resting upside down in about 90 of fast-moving water that is frequently traveled by freighters up to 700 long. It is not a place you want to be floating around at the surface. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe for more real-life creepy encounters around the world. See you in the next video. Bye.